Well, welcome to part two of Dinosaurs in the Bible as part of our Digging In series here at Creation and Compost. I hope you enjoyed part one as we kind of laid the groundwork for the evidence of dinosaur fossils and some of the contrast between the secular worldview versus a biblical creationist perspective, primarily that of a young earth creationist. Now, again, I make no apologies about it. I firmly believe that Scripture is 100% true, inerrant, infallible, and that God, when He created everything, He did it in 6 literal 24-hour days, just as the book of Genesis discusses. I take that literally. I take that on faith, just as a secular scientist, a naturalist, takes on faith that the Big Bang Theory occurred billions of years ago and that things have evolved over time. I believe that God created everything based on its kind, after its own kind, and that everything was very good. So in the very beginning, I believe everything was very good. So that would strongly contradict the notion that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago if He created everything good. I don't believe that He did everything based on death and suffering and survival of the fittest. This was something that came along later. I do believe in natural selection, and I do believe in other things that relate to how living things adapt and change over time, which we can talk about more later. But let's just jump into it. On day 5 is when God creates all of the flying and all of the aquatic animals. So this is when all the fish and all the birds, any reptiles, especially those that would be classified as like a pterosaur or a plesiosaur, as far as dinosaurs go, they would have been created at this time as well. The vast majority of dinosaurs were land animals, as fossils show us, and these would have been created on day 6, right before mankind. Man was, of course, the last of the creation. Now, there was no suffering before man sinned. We don't know exactly when Adam and Eve fell from grace. Some people believe it was a couple of weeks. I would actually fall into that camp after the creation. And then some people believe it was 100 years. Okay, Scripture does not really tell us, but nonetheless, there was no death and suffering before Adam and Eve sinned. Romans 8:21 says that the bondage of decay and the bondage of suffering is evidence of man's sin. So we know that things began to die over time, especially after Noah and his family got off the ark. Things were radically different. The entire climate was changed. All the plants, all the animals that were not aboard the ark were dead. They all died. So the landscape looked completely different. Continental drift had occurred, okay? Pangea, or whatever you want to refer to the landmass as, things had drifted apart. Huge mountains existed that never had existed before. Large layers of, what's referred to as the geologic column existed now. There was large sedimentation all over the earth. So, things were a lot different. So that means that not only the climate, the atmosphere, the vegetation, the available food, habitats, all that stuff were completely different, okay? Now, if we think about where everything kind of started to take place, Genesis 8:4 says, in the mountains of Ararat, this is where the ark settled. The fear and dread of mankind probably fell upon animals because in Genesis 9, government, new laws about eating, these types of things were instilled by God into Noah and his family. They were expected to, set up an order for civilization beyond this point. So it's very possible that dinosaurs became very territorial, like a lot of animals do, whenever their climate, their habitats are changed, the available food that they have, and of course man is given permission to eat meat. So with the few resources that were available as human population began to multiply, dinosaurs probably became something that humans hunted after. It's also quite possible because of the lack of resources, animals became more aggressive at this point. So you had things like dinosaurs that, possibly over time were growing larger and, of course, wanting to establish their dominance, had to defend themselves as well. Now, dinosaurs are found all throughout the world in terms of fossils, but a lot of the time, these dinosaurs are not referred to as dinosaurs. A lot of people refer to large reptile-like animals as dragons. And interestingly enough, the word dragon is used over 30 times in Scripture. It could be quite possible that because of all civilizations across the world having some historical, drawings, artwork, poetry, experiences, written works of, emperors of China having pet dragons that they would have in these parades and would feed. It's quite possible that dragons could also be dinosaurs. So all of these cultures and civilizations could have quite possibly had dinosaurs that were very much present as part of their day-to-day routine. If we go and look at Britain, Wales, we mentioned China. The Chinese lunar calendar has 12 different symbols to represent, the different months, the different personalities that you'd get if you go to a Chinese restaurant and you get your little sheet in front of you and it's got those 12 animals. Guess what is one of the animals? It's a dragon. And, when we think about dragons, we might think in our minds of, fire breathing, flying around, kind of like in the movie Shrek, maybe falls in love with a donkey, who knows. But dragons could have very well been real animals that we know as dinosaurs. It's quite possible they both could have, could be the same thing. Now, how does this contrast with millions and millions of years? Well, as we've mentioned, dinosaurs were not called dinosaurs until about 1841. Sir Richard Owen came up with the term at this time, and before that they were referred to as other things, quite possibly dragons. But there's also in Scripture, if you look at Job chapter 40, I'm going to read these few verses. 15 through 19 are the verses. Job is being kind of scolded by God, and we'll go into that some other time if you want to hear the account of Job. But he's giving Job a lesson on what all he did before Job ever came into existence. And he says a very interesting word here in verse 15. He says, "Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief in the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him." So what would behemoth be referring to? Well, some biblical scholars agree, or they have concluded, that this could be talking about a hippopotamus or an elephant. How many hippopotamus or elephant kinds have you ever seen that had tails that moved like a cedar? Okay. I think it's all possible that they're, very large animals, obviously, that they eat a lot of grass, the strength is in the navel of their belly, and, their bones are like bars of iron, very, very strong lower bodies. But how many of them have tails that move like a cedar? And it says that he was made alongside thee, and he is the chief in his ways of God. I would think this probably refers to some large land dinosaur like a brachiosaurus, what we used to call brontosaurus whenever we were growing up. I think it's very possible that's what God's referring to here. If he created everything in 6 literal days, dinosaurs would have been part of that. It says he made behemoth with thee, with mankind. So I think there's some hints there that show that this very well could be a dinosaur that God is referring to. Now, another interesting name that God refers to in chapter 41 is the word Leviathan. It says in verse 1, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down?" It says, "Can thou puttest a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn?" And then it goes on to say, "Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal." And then it goes on to say, "Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap about. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his nose," or out of his mouth. And it talks more and more about this. So we mentioned fire-breathing dragons. It could very well possibly be that because of the amount of methane in the atmosphere, or Now, it could very well be that because of the way the atmosphere, the climate was, their diet, we even see today cows and large animals put off a lot of methane, either by belching or from their backside as they are digesting their food. It could very well possibly be that this animal produced large amounts of methane, which of course would have been flammable. So if we think about it in that context, just critically think in that way, it's very quite possibly that there were fire-breathing reptiles, this Leviathan, that existed a long time ago. Could have been even up until recent years, just the scripture does not allude exactly how long dinosaurs or dragons or leviathans existed after the flood. But based on evidence that we'll see in the next part of this series, you'll be able to see cultures and civilizations that have obviously had very close encounters with what we would call today as dinosaurs. Now, as far as dinosaurs on the ark, this is a question a lot of people have, and they say, how could God have put these large dinosaurs on the ark? Well, first off, there's about 55 different kinds, according to how we would classify them based on appearance and different things like that, different kinds of dinosaurs. About 668 species have been found, but God was not telling Noah to bring 2 of each species. He said bring 2 of each kind. So, of course, Noah, being a smart man, he was 500 whenever he built the ark, and about 600 or so once he got off the ark, he was knowledgeable enough to know which ones to bring. So could it be that he possibly brought babies? Young dinosaurs, ones that would be smaller, take up less space, ones that would eat less food, produce less waste, ones that would live longer, ones that would reproduce for a longer period of time. It's quite possible that he could have used this approach. Okay. We also have to remember the ark was absolutely enormous. You're talking about a big boat. If you've been to the ark encounter in Kentucky, you'll see just how massive this structure is because they've built it to scale. So it would have had more than enough room to house a couple of babies for a period of about a year, which is how long Noah and his family stayed aboard the ark. Now, in the next part, we'll get into a lot of the evidence that has been found over time to contradict the millions of years story that you would get going into a public school classroom, or that you would get watching most of your public education outlets, where they talk about the dinosaurs going extinct millions and millions of years ago. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share, and we hope to see you on the next part.